Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Dear/X/ I don't usually frequent your board. I'm more of a /fit//IC//cow/ sort of person. But I figured you guys are into this sort of thing, and maybe you can understand it better than I do. My first memory is perhaps from before I was even 1 year old. I have a good way of recounting the different time periods because when I was 2, our house burnt down, so I remember a lot of stuff around that period too. My oldest memory was a dream, or so I told myself, or so my mother told me when I asked her about it. I dreamt that I was someone else. I had a bigger body and was in a very green, leafy-looking place. I'm Eastern European from a gray block city, so my real environment was much removed from this. There were lots of crocodiles or alligators there, and for some reason I couldn't walk, and I was very scared, but I didn't know why. 2 or so year old me realized that I was forgetting a lot of things, a lot of my early, mundane memories. So I made a conscious effort to retell my memories to myself all the time, so I wouldn't forget them. I ended up forgetting a lot still, but I will never forget that dream, nor the fact that I was different, or even smarter before I started forgetting. I'm not a strong believer, but I do think something was up. I don't have anyone I could tell this about. It just sounds too corny. I know what I remember, though, and it creeps me out. I like to listen to random documentaries while I draw, and that was when I came across the past life thing. It really triggered a lot of memories for me, especially the memory of being already a full individual with complex thoughts that was all too aware of their memories fading. I wish I could talk to a therapist about it, but they wouldn't believe me. My wife believes me, but she's more into this stuff that I'm comfortable with, so I don't bring it up much.
I get random flashbacks every now and then, usually 1 or 2 a year for the last 6 years. I don't recall getting them before that. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, though. I'm beginning to think it's my past lives. There are 3 different time periods I think I'm seeing. I'll start with earliest. Looks like prehistoric Europe. I've only ever seen one other person in this time period. First time it happened, I was standing on a cliff staring at stars. Night sky seemed to look very different. Second and third time was basically just walking around. Fourth time I saw what I think to be a woolly mammoth. This is the time I saw someone else, and they appeared to look like what we imagined the first Europeans to look like, just significantly hairier. Second time period. Looks to be around the 1500s. Only 2 times I've had this flashback. Both were very boring. One was walking through a dark forest and the second was sitting on a chair in what looked to be a lodge. Third time period. Guessing it's around 1916 or 1917. Very clear it's during World War I during the first flashback. Second flashback, I'm on a massive boat in the middle of the ocean. Third flashback, I'm walking through a field. Fades to black. Then I'm walking through what I'm guessing is a trench. Only time that's ever happened, where it seems to show 2 different times at once. This was the longest one as well, in a group of what seems to be 5, maybe 6 people, based on how many voices I remember. Can see 2 people in front of me, hear a loud shout, then a large cracking sound is the best way I can explain it. Goes black and vision is done. Haven't had one since then. If you believe the whole birthmarks are from your past lives theory, the only birthmark I have is a spot in the back of my head with no color, white, and my hair is nearly black, so that is a pretty weird coincidence.
Sometimes it feels like there's something, like memories that are not quite clear and make no sense, especially since they are from different unrelated periods. But the most recent one is usually the one that is easier to grab onto. It's from the mid-20th century, somewhere between the 40s and 60s maybe. I've always been into music from that period even as a kid. There's one from 1961 that always makes me cry for no reason, and the style and many little things. There's 2 occasions in particular that come to mind. Be in the military. Sleep deprivation plus the relentless sound of gunshots make me start hearing things. Hear voices and shouting in the middle of some conflict. A child nervously asking things stands out. For a second, see European. Village. Come back to the present time. Be in New York City. Go visit the USS Intrepid because of some fare. They are playing a video that has battle scenes. Red light, and call to battle stations goes off. Get extremely anxious. Feels like a bad memory or something. Have to go see other things.
Something with Egypt. Then something with the Cold War and UFOs. Never had a doubt in my mind that UFOs were real. Not necessarily ET visitation, even when I was a preteen. I saw multiple UFOs while skywatching on my roof throughout my teens and early 20s. Interesting story. In the summer of 2007, I had been trying to get my friends to watch some Disclosure Project testimonies, to look at some documents, watch a couple other videos like Tom Van Flanders' U.S. Naval Observatory discoveries on Mars, etc. I quickly became the laughingstock of the group, as they were all AP Calculus, Materialist Physics Club types who went on to top universities and are all extremely successful now. I am a mid-tier academic at decent East Coast University now, by the way. Anyway, I had become the schizo within my small circle of high school friends. Didn't care too much though, because I had already seen multiple orbs, a few of which I engaged with consciously, had seen one octagonal-shaped craft with zip-zop-zoo pity lights fly directly over my head, and had done my homework with regard to the documentation and other evidence. So July 2007, 3 of my friends and I were chilling with a few beers on my roof, all home from college for a couple months. After about 20 minutes of them chattering and me basically just stargazing, I said, "Man, I wish we could see a UFO." Not a second passed before 2 low-flying golden orbs appeared directly above us, very low, maybe 100 feet up. One slightly behind the other, moving slowly and perfectly in sync and silent. They headed eastward towards Lake Michigan, and eventually out of sight past the tree line. We were all dumbfounded. No one said a word for about 10 seconds until we all started laughing hysterically and screaming, "What the fuck, dude?" and so on. It later became a no-go topic of conversation, unfortunately. I'd mention it to them in passing, and from my perception, what was originally a moment of pure wonder and happiness for them turned into absolute fear of the situation, big-time cognitive dissonance, and something bordering on fear of me. The one guy who I wasn't that close with couldn't even look at me in the eye after that. The other 2 simply changed the conversation whenever it came up. I felt vindicated. Not sure why I had the urge to tell this story. I guess it's because it's been 11 years almost, and it's bonkers how time flies.
Be me, Japanese soldier, feudal era. Just your average swordsman. The officer asks me to kill some civilians while we are taking a town. He couldn't be bothered keeping and feeding them as prisoners. Hesitate a bit, but do it anyway. I can't get over it. Leave soon after. Find a wife and run away in a woods outside a small village. Have a kid, still thinking about what happened. Realize, although the officer asked me to do it, I was ultimately to blame for their deaths. Feelsbadman.jpg. One day, I heard my kid and wife scream from down the road. Quiet, I know it's too late. Sit still. Bandits come up the road. One claims to be a kid of the civs I killed. Don't move and let him gut me because I learned everything I needed to know. Lost everything already. Karma. All in all, a decent life with a good lesson. Any past life stories you'd like to share /X/. I understand that some negatively aligned groups might be very interested as well, so be careful what you share.
I was a Vietnam vet. I don't remember being there. I just remember my childhood and my mom and my house and little sisters. We lived in a smallish house by a lake. My mother would hang the clothes out to dry when it was sunny. I'd play with my sisters and friends out in our backyard on the big rocks that lined the water. There were always spiders in between them. Always. I became the sort of teenager that was obsessed with his part-time job and earning money and being able to buy things. I got a record player and a really cool motorcycle. My favorite band was The Doors. Sometimes in the summer, my family would go to this town where my grandparents lived. It wasn't very big and mostly old people lived there. There were these creepy plaster statues in the woods left over from a carnival the town had before it was shitty, and they just were kind of tossed in the forest instead of disposed of properly. I don't remember much else aside from my death. I'm not sure what my cause of death was, but it was definitely my fault. I was in my garage when it happened. I'd stopped talking to my family years beforehand. I think I probably offed myself. I just remember it was so painful, and I immediately felt immense regret as soon as it was too late. I didn't want to become unable to remember the good times, even if the times had become unbearably bad in those last years. I never was really sure if the whole past life thing was legitimate, but one day the neighbor kid and I were doing those vocabulary cards, and I pulled out a card with a fireman. She immediately recognized it and said, "Firemen are important, they save people. I used to be a fireman when I was big." She's like 3 and it was awesome.
Something similar happened to me. I went in a trance while I was standing surrounded by my family when I was 4. I saw everything dark except for a man. Me in previous life, I somehow knew this was me. He was sitting at a round table and smoking unfiltered tobacco with a shot of alcohol next to him dressed in old fashion. I started saying, "When I was big," and talking about my past self, and my dumb older sister wanted the attention, so she also started saying, "When I was big," to copy me. Typical girly Leo behavior. Anyways, after she got the attention, I moved on, and I only got another vision another 15 years later.
Read Return to Life by Jim B. Tucker, Maryland. In this book, Tucker writes about his decades of research into reincarnation and past life memories of children. He writes about many cases in which he has interviewed children with past life memories, in which some of them remember exactly who they were and get the facts 100% correct of the deceased person's life the children are remembering. Some of what the children remember and get correct, they couldn't have possibly known any other way. In most of these cases of children remembering past lives, the person in the past life has appeared to have died unnaturally, young, and/or traumatically. I could go on about this, but read the book.
I don't directly remember any past lives, but I have some inclinations about what they might have been. For example, I have an unusual emotional response when thinking about the First World War, and particularly the Battle of the Somme. So I suspect I may have died here, but I don't actually remember it. My lineage includes merchant seafarers, and before that many generations of traditional fishermen on the Scottish islands of Shetland, I don't remember this, but I am drawn to the sea. I have a Bachelor of Science Marine and Freshwater Biology, and I like being at sea on smaller boats. I am also drawn to Scotland in general, live in England now, and have had a passion for fishing since I was about 3 or 4. Some things come much more easily to me than others, though, and I wonder if there are things I practiced in previous lives. It feels like things I find hard are things I'm trying for the first time, and things that come easier I was already good at in a previous life. I also think I may have been a Sasquatch or something. I remember being asked as a 5-year-old what I wanted to be when I grew up, and saying a Hindu gorilla, and knowing that this was a serious answer, and knowing from experience that this was a good choice. I also remember seeing footage of a nuke for the first time as a child, and my intrinsic reaction being, I can do that. Like I knew that there was some muscle I could flex but hadn't taken conscious control of, but if I did, the result would be like a nuclear blast with me at its center. But I wouldn't be hurt. No idea where that idea came from, but it seems like a strange response to seeing that for the first time.
Be me. Be prehistoric me. Out with a hunting party, going to kill a cave bear, or something it's hard to tell, because mostly people just kind of make a generic sound and point. But we had to have spears, so I'm sure we are hunting. Get the feeling the others know what's going on, and I'm just always lost, feel dumb, but don't know any word for dumb. Find it. Yup, short-faced bear. Its first thaw. What else would it be? We starts to spread out. It helps to spread out. It looks pissed. Can tell not everyone is going to make it back to the campsite. It starts at me, slowly. Poke it in the neck with the spear. Was aiming at an eye. They run away after I stick it. Half of them didn't even carry their spears. It lunges and I lose hold of the spear and scramble for another. It almost crushes me as I roll to the side. My back hurts from rolling over a few rocks. It ends itself while trying to kill me by driving the spear deeper into its own neck at some point. I wasn't watching. I was just trying not to die. Go back to the camp, because what else am I going to do? I can't carry it. Cut off one of its ears so they know what's going on. I can't communicate well with them. Find the yucking it up. When they notice me, they get scared. Point to the woods and signal for them to follow. None do. Throw the ear at the village elder. Get banished. Apparently I'm something like a spook to them now. One of the few words I know because they use it for anything scary. Go back and eat bear raw over 3 days. Can't tan hide because I decay what they say. So I could ever follow along. Get sick, but still alive. Good thing it's spring.
During a near-death experience, I had my life flash before my eyes. Not just my current life, but one where I was a tree living in the middle of a forest. It was completely different to the human experience, almost indescribable. Time passed differently, like a perpetual time lapse. Days like hours and years like days. Summer was the equivalent of day and winter was night. Sight happened through my leaves, absorbing light from all directions, feeling the world as a blend of color. I remember being a house for hundreds of different small creatures like insects, rodents, and birds. The hardest struggles were the driest and hottest summers while I was still a small sapling. The sun wouldn't stop beaming, and there's nothing I could do to find relief. I remember one day a footpath appeared next to me where I was regularly visited by hikers. Then everything went black. I woke up again in a hospital ICU, back in my current self. Sometimes I think about that previous life as a tree. I even miss it, honestly. It was a patient and peaceful life. It was a comfy life.
I think I might have had a past life dream just now. It started out goofy and kind of unrealistic, but suddenly got vivid. My family was in some dark dining hall with shades drawn down to make it romantic for a special couple that was getting married. Someone got tired of the shades being drawn, and what was behind the shades were long medieval stone buildings and a castle in the distance. I eventually head over to the castle in the distance for some reason and appreciate the view of the rest of the place. Later, I'm walking to church and have to chaperone this kid I know in the dream, but don't recognize at all in real life. We cut through the military graveyard with dozens of wooden horsehead-shaped graves. He runs his hand on all of them as we walk by. When we get to the church, I lose sight of him. I found him with a bunch of altar boys playing rock, paper, scissors or something when the altar boys were supposed to be praying over a casket. The boy I was watching over really feels bad about what he did. I asked him if he regretted what he did, and he said something really intelligent for a kid his age. I forgot exactly what it was, but it was something about kids not being as aware of their actions like adults. And despite him being a kid, he still understood the gravity of what he caused. When I woke up, I decided to look up this place I dreamt about. I was still half awake and Lancaster popped into my head. Sure enough, there was a Lancaster, England with very similar looking buildings in my dream. In my dream, the buildings looked more pristine and weren't in ruins. I've never heard of Lancaster, England to my knowledge ever. I'm an American who has mostly lived in the southern U.S. for most of my life.
I've always loved rockabilly and surf music from the 50s and 60s with no explanation. I was not raised listening to it. One summer day when I was about 13, I was listening to various hot rod instrumentals on my iPod Nano, just like every other day of the summer. One song on, and I really wish I could remember which, because it made me lock up completely and have a vision of speeding in a car with a guy who was apparently my boyfriend, turning a sharp curve on a road and the car flipping over the railing. It was a brutal accident, and we were both killed instantly. I can only assume we were listening to the song I heard at the time of the accident, which was from the 50s. If that's the case, we had to be wealthy kids to be listening to music as small record players in cars were fairly new. Unless we were listening to the radio. I don't know. I feel very angry at whoever my BF was for being so careless with our young lives. But I wish I could meet him again, as his death fills me with grief.
I legitimately think I had a past life in a reality totally different from anything on Earth, like a different universe or a different kind of reality altogether. My earliest memory is of seeing myself from the outside, floating above, and then in an instant just becoming me. And most of my life I was into scientific rationalization, so I would tell myself it was just a dream or something, but even then I didn't really believe that. What's weird is that I have experiences which are memory-like, but they're not actual memories. It's like an intense feeling that there's something I used to do but forgot. And it's the strangest thing because no matter how hard I try, I can't even think of one activity that remotely matches the feelings. Like it's some activity that doesn't even exist in this reality. It only lasts a second or two and then fades away like a dream. But every time it makes me desperate to hold on to the feeling by trying to associate it with something. I always fail, and the closest words I can come up with in the moment to describe the feelings is just random shit that makes no sense. Usually colors or flavors for some reason, like lemon lime, but it's a feeling. I wonder if this is why I like Mountain Dew so much, lol.
I seem to recall a few different past selves, but only two of which come through somewhat clearly. The last was a man named Thomas Baldwin. No idea how it was spelled, I just think about how it is pronounced. He didn't know how to read or write, but I get the sense he lived in France or Hungary maybe. He was a bad person, to say the least, and was killed in a small skirmish where he was stabbed in the gut with a boar spear. I remember his last thought were anger that someone used a hunting weapon on him, and how in God's name did it penetrate his ring mail. After falling to his knees, he was beheaded from behind, and I remember trying to spit on my killers as I rolled away. I think the reason I can remember Thomas is because his actions are the reason I chose to incarnate into poverty this time around. I felt guilty over Thomas's life and didn't want the opportunity to become a person like that again. But who knows? The other was a man named Akkan, a priest in Kemet. I remember Akkan's last day when he was getting dressed, putting on his finest clothes and jewels, and putting on the best makeup he owned. He spent a lot of time saying goodbye to his pets. He had 3 cats and a dog, I think. He had his neighbor take them because they all knew he was done for. He had been called back to his temple to answer for heresy against the gods. He was well aware that the punishment for heresy was death, even for someone of his station. He could have fled and lived in Nubia where his mother's family was from, but instead he returned to the temple. On the way there were armed guards that fell to their knees at the sight of him. My guess is because they knew they were going to be sent to kill him, and they were grateful that he was returning to face punishment. I remember the pool in front of the temple was so beautiful that night. It honestly looked like it had lights in the water somehow. I don't know how that is possible, but that's what it looked like. He walked up the temple steps as slowly as possible without stopping. Somehow he thought of it as some kind of victory to look so good and be so graceful gliding to his death. There was a thin curtain hanging over the high priest's door. I remember the guy had such a big ugly nose that Akkan always hated and was jealous of. I guess he thought the nose might be why the high priest had better breath work than he did. Maybe it was just vanity. The high priest looked at him and nodded slowly. He glanced at his personal guards and Akkan was immediately stabbed to death. They were very sloppy about it, and death took a while longer than it should have. I think I remember Akkan's death because of how deliberately and almost passionately marched to his own death. He was guilty of the heresies he was being executed for, and he would not renounce them, and he would not flee. I was supposed to know that for some punishments we are deserving of them. The heresies? He began telling people that not all of the gods were gods. He just wanted everyone to know that some of them were just ascended mortals, but only the priesthood was allowed to discuss that. He didn't really doubt their power or divinity. He just wanted people to know that the Gators were once not. He thought people would be happy to hear those things, but he was wrong. So he accepted fate and reaffirmed his faith by not fleeing in fear.
Be me, mid-18th century Portugal, somewhere on the coast, midsummer. A bit arid, but with plentiful greenery around. Mansion on a hill, overlooking a vineyard and facing the sea. Guess I was a wine merchant, wearing an open red doublet with a white unbuttoned shirt underneath. walking a path leading from the sloping vineyards to a large terrace on the side of the mansion. There's a big party with a lot of rich guests, waiters going in and out of the kitchen, serving wine, carrying platters, popping champagne bottles. It's lively. Everyone is laughing and loudly chatting about, telling stories. A band is playing in a corner of the terrace, and there's couples dancing on a small patch of dance floor next to them. Go down to the kitchen and spot the sea from a small window above the sink. Fill myself a nice icy glass of water and go back to the terrace. Life is good. Summer is green. As I was typing this, I remembered these other somewhat recurring dreams of the same mansion left in absolute ruin, crumbling and destroyed, as if it had been shelled during wartime, and no one had dared open its gates since then. In these dreams, all the white paint had left its walls. Its roofs had collapsed and filled its interior with rubble. Its rooms were cavernous and dark, and no traces of any fine ceramics or furniture could be found, not even in the rubble. I wonder what this all means.
My earliest memory came to me when I was about 2 or 3 years old. Be me. Looking upon an open field, a beautiful green hill is rolling down from the left of my view to the right, where there's some trees and a creek. The world looks like I'm viewing it from a slit in a mask. The top and bottom of my fields of view are dark. I feel an incredible sense of camaraderie. I'm with my brothers. I can't see them, but I know that my people are all around me, and I love them incredibly. I have a huge sense of excitement which is amped up by a sense of dread. The next thing I remember is a horrid pressure pushing deeply into the base of my neck. I can taste blood, and I can taste the taste of metal pressuring into my throat, on my tongue. This horrific taste of metal in my throat consumes my senses. The memory ends. I'm convinced it was a shattered memory of some kind of battle, and I am convinced I had a sword plunged into my throat. I can still taste that taste of metal in my throat when I focus on and think about it. Now I'm almost 30. It's my first ever conscious memory, and I've never forgotten it. Do any other anons have memories like this?
Yes, and the stronger the impressions and the more details, textures, sounds there are, the more likely they are to remain stuck. It's hard to say whether it's a real memory, and not just a very vivid experience shot through your immaterial eyes, though. If it was from a true, authentic world life, you should be able to distill the narrative and impressions at heart that came from that life. It would be like reading a book without words, just vibes and impressions, but that takes time to hone skill-wise, and you might not have the entire navigational freedom to do so. Try to put your focus on the metal first, then hold it for a minute, then try to look around, sense around, what came before and after. Don't control the visualization too much. To illustrate, I once had a memory come loose that had a particular intense vibe, and when I probed around and felt it, held it, and then dug deeper beyond it, I found a different lead, and it was a soul of old teasing me. When I focused on that other impression and pressed through it, I felt a profound and deeply serene mindly release of growing very old with another being that wasn't like me. That was like a summary for many different lessons, griefs, feelings, and so on. Rather than a single memory, it's a blurred distillation of profound moments. Another was of a war in another time and space where a lot of people died. I've never felt so under pressure, hollow and crushed. It was a slow descent into insanity, with no way to stop the conflict, and the fallout and loss of life was immense. There's been more of these things coming loose over the years. Use these focal points to navigate your space and go through your own mental map and landscape.
You know how when a baby is born at a hospital, a nurse will go over to the baby and write something on their pad? Have you ever thought about what they write? My theory is that they write down the baby's true name, the unchanging, eternal name of their soul. I'm not sure how they identify it, but once they do, they write it down and look it up in some kind of past life database while you're at the hospital with your newborn baby. Whether they've had spiritually notable past lives determines what course of action the hospital staff take. This is why sometimes they'll get a priest or some other elite holy man to come and bless the child even if you didn't ask for it. You'll have to practically push the elite away to keep him from touching your child. Them inviting an elite without even asking the parents violates the secularity principle, yet sometimes they do. Why? I believe it's because with the blessing they purify the child's soul from the weight of their past lives. Not just the sins of their past lives like a shaman or Buddhist monk would do, but essentially wiping the slate clean. They make it impossible for the child to retain any experience from their past lives, making them blissfully ignorant and consequently more malleable. So what if in a past life the child was a great enlightened spiritual teacher or bringer of peace and prosperity? The elite peddle narratives that humanity will be in a state of disunity and misery before the end times begin. Reunification of denominations or even different religions would bring people closer to each other and increase peace in the world. And perhaps there is a belief of apocalyptic accelerationism among the elite. It's just a theory, could be wrong.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.